heard an expression probably more than a few times, and I really want to use it as I start my comments to you today. The expression is, you ready for it? I'm from corporate. I'm here to help. But I'm here to tell you that I really mean it. And you can trust me, because I'm a recovering big city lawyer. So if you can't trust us, who can you trust? There's so many things I have to share, and I have so kind of limited time. It's something I'm really passionate about, but one of the things I'm passionate about is, what is our goal as a company? I mean, sure, we talk about sales, 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 but that's really a byproduct of something else. And that something else is, our goal as a company is to be the favorite local supermarket, and pharmacy as well. Do you agree with that? Yes. That's our goal. And so I believe, and I hope you believe, that if you're serious about that, you want to embrace every single tool available. That's, of course, legal, ethical, and moral. But you want to embrace every single tool possible to try to accomplish that. One of those tools that we can use to accomplish that, I believe, is to embrace diversity and inclusion. And there's a business case for that. And I want to talk with you about why it's important. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story. Years ago, when I was a struggling law school student, my goal was to practice at a firm in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I now live. I was going to school in Oregon at the time, and I got what's called a summer clerkship to work there in the summer. So I needed a place to live in the summer after my second year of law school. I called a couple of friends of mine, and they put me in contact with someone who had a house in Oakland. And this person was looking for someone to rent a room, so it was going to be great. So I talked to the woman on the phone, and she said, "Jonathan, you sound like such a really nice guy. I look forward to meeting you." I'm thinking, I am a nice guy. I'm looking forward to meeting you. And so I'll never forget, it was a Sunday, and I drove from Salem, Oregon to Oakland, kind of a long drive, roughly 10-ish hours or so. And I remember driving up, pulling into the driveway, and walking up the steps, ringing the doorbell, and the door opens, and a young man is there, he's in his 30s, and he says, "Hi, Jonathan, how are you?" And I said, "Fine." And then I turned and looked kind of into the living room area, and off to the side was the dining room. And there was the woman of the house, the mother, she was a widow, over at the dining room area. And I looked at her. I, to this day, don't remember ever seeing a smile turn upside down faster than that instant in time. It was, as best I can describe, a look of contempt right at me. I could feel a chill. It was palpable in that corner of the room. It was kind of like going to a party and the music is just jamming, and all of a sudden, and everything comes to a stop. That's how it felt. Her son-in-law, and that was the person who greeted me at the door, picked up on this right away. It was just so clear. And he said, "Hey, Jonathan, you probably don't know how to get from here to the law firm where you'll be working tomorrow. How about if I give you a ride?" Well, to be honest, I had just been in a car for like 10 hours. Kind of the last thing on my to-do list was to get into a car again, right then. But I saw the wisdom in that. I'll never forget what he said. I'd never met him before in my entire life, this guy. I get in the car, he closed the doors, and he turned to me and he said, "I am so sorry." Anyway, we get back to the house, and I'm shown my room, go to bed, wake up the next morning, and go into the living room. And I'm on my way out the door to go to my first day at work. I'm so excited. I've wanted to be a lawyer since I was a kid. My first day at the law firm, can you imagine? I was all excited. I come up the stairs, and the woman of the house is sitting in the living room. And I said, "Good morning." And she said, "No, it's not." And I said, "I'm sorry, is something wrong?" And through gritted teeth, she said, "You should have told me." And I said, "Told you what?" "That you're black." And I said, "I didn't know it mattered. Does it matter?" She said, "Why, yes, it matters." I said, "Why?" She said, my neighbors are going to think you're a burglar. So you can't stay there." I looked at her and I said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, I really don't think they're going to think I'm a burglar. Because most days, when I leave in the morning or I come home at night, I'm going to be dressed like I am today. I was wearing a suit. I had a white shirt on and a tie, and I was carrying a briefcase. I really don't think, ma'am, they're going to think I'm a burglar." I said, "But I can't do much now. How about if we do this? When I get home from work today, how about if I meet your neighbors and I explain I'm a law school student here for the summer?" She said, "You can't stay here." I said, "Ma'am, you promised me I could stay here. I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to go." She said, "You can't stay here." I said, "Can I at least stay here one more night so I can kind of figure out other options?" She said, "One night and you're out of here." So I go to work, and a couple of the partners take me to lunch. I'll never forget this. And we're at this pretty fancy restaurant. And they look at me and they say, "So, Jonathan, how are things going so far for you here?" And I said, "Do you really want to know?" They said, "Yes." I told them. And I'll never forget what one of the partners said. He said, "Do you want to sue her?" I love you, man. This is a place where I don't want to work. I didn't say all that. That's what I was thinking, just like that. And I love my wife. My wife kills it. My wife is awesome. We met when we were teenagers. I love her. I knew this would really hurt her. And I wanted to try to figure out what I was going to do before she called. I have a policy. I've been married for nearly 36 years. I know it's hard to believe, but 36 married in teenagers, but yeah, something like that. I have a policy, and so far I've stuck to it. I never, ever, ever, and if you're married or partners, I hope you use the same policy, I never lie to my wife. Now, from time to time, I might forget a minute detail. But I never lie. I still do it. And so she asked how things are going, and I had to tell her. My wife, who I had known, as I said, since we were teenagers, did something I've never, ever, 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 ever heard her do. She started to cry on the phone. And it hurt me so much that my wife was hurting like that, I started to cry. It was awful. I tell you this story because things like this happen to varying degrees all the time. I just picked one story, and perhaps some of you in the room may have stories like that. But the reality is that it happens all too often in much more subtle ways. And I want to talk with you about this. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was driving across one of the bridges last year, and I came across a posse of motorcycles. I don't ride. Anybody ride here? Show of hands. Good. Anybody ride Harleys? Yeah. And so, what kind of motorcycles do they use? Harleys. So I'm going across this road, this bridge, and I look, coming up on this group, and I look to my right, and I'm saying, man, that is beautiful black and polished chrome. Gosh, I love this. And then I keep driving by and looking more. Oh, wow, it's a beautiful bike. Wow, it's a beautiful bike. And then after about a minute, I said to myself, wait a second. Where are the Hondas? Where are the Kawasaki's? Where are the Suzuki's? Well, they weren't there. Because Harley people like to be with Harley people. I'm not dissing Harley people, but people kind of like to be with people who are kind of like them. All things equal. Most people are that way. So I get that. But the challenge is that it spills over into the work world all too often. This goes back a generation or two ago, but this is kind of how it used to look. That's how businesses used to roll in terms of what the leadership looked like. And even in the stores, again, this goes back years ago, but this is kind of how it used to look. And those of you who've been with the company a long time are going to agree with me on this. By the way, who's the person most likely to become CEO one day of these people pictured here? The tallest. Statistically, that's right. Less than 15% of American men are over 6 feet tall. Roughly between 1 and 6, 1 and 7. Less than 15%. Which of these, A, B, C, and D, is the correct answer in terms of the percent of American men who are over 6 feet tall? What do you think? I hear B. Yeah, I mean, you would think that. Proportionally, that would kind of make more sense. What if I told you it was D? 15%, yet 16%. But it's not only that. Here, look at this one. Less than 4% of American men are over 6'2". 1 in 25, obviously. But the number, it's 36%. The answer is C. There's something to this. And this is not new. This has been going on for millennia. I mean, the first king of Israel, it was said about him, he was a head and shoulders above everyone else. Tall guy, that's our leader. I mean, I used to play college basketball. I used to hang out with a lot of people who were over 6 feet tall. I'm here to tell you, and if you're over 6 feet tall, don't take this personally, but it's not all that. Let's just keep it real here. There's some people under 6 feet tall who kill it. But the perception is, if you're taller, you're the leader. Not necessarily so. How tall are you? 5'8", he said. I don't know who writes your material. That's pretty good. So, I'm not asking...
Don't be knocking 5'8" people.
I promise, I love all people.
I didn't say 5'7".
I love all people. So, I'm not asking you by show of hands. This is just between you and you, okay? Just between you. If tax season, right around the corner, tax season. If you were to pick someone, that you're here, to manage your tax return, who would you pick? Not asking you to raise your hand or anything like this, but just be honest with yourself. Look introspectively and ask yourself that question. Some of you are thinking about retiring someday. Of the people pictured here, who would you pick to manage your retirement account? And then ask yourself, why? Where is that coming from? Just think about that. Here's an interesting fact, and a very telling fact. Did you know, maybe at your next cocktail party you can share this if you want. Did you know there are more men named John who run big companies in the U.S. than all women combined? Think about that for a second. Let that sink in. The name John. But it's not just John, it's the name David as well. And then Robert. Again, what's the name of our CEO? Oh, never mind. I'm going to move on. But think about that for a second. Women at S&P 500 companies. They make up roughly 44.3% according to statistics as of 2017. But in terms of just the executive ranks, look at it. It's under 6% of women for S&P 500 companies are CEO, yet they make up 44%. You have to ask yourself, and you all are thinkers here, you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? Why? Well, here are some of the reasons why. It kind of goes to the role of the mind. Mind, incredible tools. I'm sure you all agree. The mind, the human brain, can take in, according to experts, 11 million distinct pieces of information at any point in time. 11 million. But yet, on a conscious level, we can only take in about 40. That is, we can only be really aware of maybe about 40. So what that means is literally millions of pieces of data and impressions are coming into our mind. We're not even on a conscious level aware that this is happening and affecting the way we think and the way we feel and the beliefs that we have. And that is what leads to unconscious bias. These are things that you don't think about again, by definition. They're unknown. It's an unspoken preference for, and by the way, bias works in two directions. There's a bias for, and there's a bias against. And it's a tendency to act a certain way, and again, it's at a subconscious level. You're not even aware of it, but it is real. It is palpable. A lot has been written about this. Here's just one of the books. If you want to dive deeper, here's a book you may want to consider. It's called Blind Spot, and it's Hidden Biases of Good People, and it's a highly respected book, highly recognized book. One of the things I want to talk with you about that I alluded to earlier is there is a business case for why diversity and inclusion can help a company be the best it can be. McKinsey, I think most of you, if not all of you, have heard of them. They've done a number of studies, and there are a lot of studies that have had very similar findings. Let's just talk about the business case about why diversity and inclusion happen to be very important. This is hot off the press. This was just published in January of this year. Here are some of the key findings, kind of at a high level. The first finding is with regard to gender diversity. Companies in the top 25%, top quartile for gender diversity are 21% more likely to experience above average profitability than companies at the other end of the spectrum that don't embrace diversity and inclusion. 21%. That's meaningful. Here's another statistic I'd like for you to consider. The benefits of racial and ethnic diversity. Companies in the top 25% for racial and ethnic diversity are 33% more likely to outperform companies that are at the lowest quartile. I'm here to tell you there's also a penalty for not embracing diversity and inclusion. What is it, you ask? Companies in the bottom 25% in terms of embracing diversity and inclusion are 29% more likely to underperform compared to their industry peers. So here are some of the other findings, kind of at a high level, from that very exhaustive study. Number one, companies that embrace diversity and inclusion produce higher financial returns, generally, than companies that do not. Second, they successfully launch more new products. Why? Because you have a broader spectrum of ideas and inputs and life experiences to shape the decision that's made in terms of whether a product should be launched or not, or what it should look like. And related to that, companies that embrace diversity and inclusion perform better at complex problem solving. They perform tasks with higher collective intelligence. And it also, as a byproduct, can lessen PR controversies by having diverse thinkers in the room. Here's just one example of so many that I could cite. Most of you, perhaps, heard about the little dust-up that H&M had earlier this year. Someone had the bright idea to put a young African-American boy in a hoodie in their ads. And it pains me to say what it says, but it says, coolest monkey in the jungle. I'm here to tell you that if somebody in that room had cultural sensitivity, perhaps if they were diverse, they might just have kind of raised their hand and say, I could be wrong. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think so. Now, some have said, oh, no, they did this on purpose. They did this on purpose. They knew what they were doing. They were just trying to get PR. Well, how did that work? Well, a number of stars that used to endorse their products did the moonwalk away from them. Dropped them like a hot rock. Don't use my name and your name in the same sentence, H&M. But even more than that, in terms of a financial impact matter, there were stores of H&M's in South Africa. I didn't even know they had stores in South Africa. But stores in South Africa where customers were so incensed and outraged by what H&M tried to pull that they were going into the stores and they were overturning racks of clothing. Employees were concerned for their safety. Corporate had to close the stores for a season of time because of this. So let's summarize here. Diversity is a competitive differentiator. It can make you stand out and outperform your peers if you embrace it. Next point. It enhances morale for women and people of color. And let me just tell you one way that takes place. If I'm a woman in the organization, or if I'm a person of color in the organization, and I'm looking at the uppermost ranks of it, and I don't see anyone who, or I see very few people who look like me, I kind of wonder, is this a place for me? Millennials often think this way. Millennials think this way. It also, by embracing diversity and inclusion, lessens other areas of exposure. I mentioned I'm a lawyer. I used to practice law full time. That's what I did. I used to practice law for this company. I used to defend companies who were accused of discriminating against women and people of color. And they would just say, show me your stats. Show me your stats for years. And they would use that to make the argument there is a pattern and practice of discrimination against women and people of color. Some of you heard just last week or 2 weeks ago, Target got slapped. Nearly $4 million they had to pay because of basically allegations of practices that discriminated against people of color. The bottom line is, embracing diversity and inclusion is good for the bottom line. It's good for the bottom line. Not only the right thing to do, it's business-wise the right thing to do. We've talked about diversity and inclusion. I want to define it in a different way. How many of you play a musical instrument that would be found in an orchestra? Play or have played in the past? Okay, sir, what do you play or did you play?
The viola.
You play viola.
Yeah.
Someone else. Who else plays? I'm going to go through the classes.
Violin.
Violin. Okay. I happen to play both instruments. Okay, seriously, since I was like this big. So I love me some viola. I love viola. I play violin. I love violin. But imagine an orchestra where all you had were viola and violin. Now these two fine gentlemen would love it. But think about how much more gets added when you bring in some French horns, and you bring in some bassoons, and you bring in some percussion, and you bring in some trumpets, and some upright basses, and the cello. Oh, and then what if you bring in some people who can sing as well? It's good, guys, but I'm sorry. It's so much better when you have others who come in with different skills. Diversity is that. It's the variety of different instruments, tools, backgrounds that come together to make beautiful music together. Inclusion is not only are they there, but the conductor calls on them to play. They're included in the process that helps make the orchestra great. That's what inclusion is. That's what diversity and inclusion is. Let me tell you what it's not. It's not. And I want to be really clear about this. When I talk about diversity and inclusion, it is not about displacing anyone currently in their role. It's not about that at all. At all. Nor is it about promoting or hiring someone who's not likely to be successful in that role. It's not about that at all. What it is about is looking more broadly at the potential pool of candidates to hire, to promote, than what we might ordinarily do. That's what it's about. I'm going to just kind of digress for a second on the orchestra for just a moment. You may know that orchestras years ago used to be almost exclusively men. There was this belief that men were superior musicians to women. And someone raised their hand and said, I don't think so. I bet if you had a partition set up and the person was playing on the other side, you couldn't tell who it was, that we would see more balance. We'd see more women. Well, guess what? That's what happened. And so most orchestras, in the US anyway, nearly 50% women, because of this notion about people that just wasn't true. Again, going back to unconscious bias. So we've talked about the business case for diversity and inclusion. And it's very clear. Let's talk about what we can do about it. Okay? What we can do about it to combat unconscious bias. I'm going to break this briefly into 3 categories. Number one, it's the way we go about recruiting and hiring. Secondly, it's about career development. And third, it's about how we interact with each other at work, team dynamics. And I need to go through this quickly. Recruiting and hiring. I want you to think about words. Words matter. So words used if there's a written posting. If you say things like, we're looking for an energetic candidate, or we're looking for a strong leader, to some, that sends a message. Let's just take strong leader. But if I'm 5'3" and a brunette, I'm not sure I feel like I fit that profile of a strong leader. I'm not sure. Just think about that for a second. Bring in a diverse pool from the very beginning. If you have five people, they all kind of look alike, maybe they're the best, maybe they're not. Maybe ask yourself, where else can we look to find people who are more diverse? Thoughtfully structure the interview process when you're talking to people. Think about and focus on what are the skills to make this person successful and to be the best candidate. What are the skills needed for this role? And really focus on those things. And then the last thing at the very bottom is consider using a grouped interview. A diverse group, maybe some women, maybe some people of color, because their perspectives might be different from you. It might add to the overall process of selecting the best possible candidate. Let's talk about career development here. Really do continue to focus on developing opportunities for everyone, really, but particularly those who you believe have a high potential to succeed. Really be intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. You have to be intentional. You have to kind of plan this. Look at people who you believe have the potential to ascend in the organization and maybe take it upon yourself to coach them. Use appropriate feedback and timely feedback. And by that I mean, if you're in a meeting with that individual, for example, and they say or do something and you think, boy, that wasn't done the right way, don't necessarily call them out right then and there, obviously. But at an appropriate time, circle back and say, I was in a meeting with you yesterday. I saw this person say this, but I saw you respond this way. Might I suggest there's another way to respond that might have gotten better outcome? Don't wait a week or a year or 6 months. Make it timely. Here's my favorite slide. I went back to school when I was given the privilege of becoming the Chief Diversity Officer. I went back to school to become a certified diversity executive. I learned a lot. Here's one of the things that was really an aha for me. Men, and there are exceptions to every single thing. There are exceptions. But men typically, if they meet about 60% of the job requirement listings, if they meet about 60% of it, many guys will say, I've got this. I've got this. I can do this. Again, there are exceptions, but many guys. Again, there are exceptions, but more typically, women don't do that. Again, there are exceptions, but more typically women don't do it. If they don't meet nearly all, they think, I'm not really ready for this, and I'm not going to apply. Here's what I'm here to say to the men in the room, and the women too, who are leaders and who are. Ready? Tell her she's ready. Tell her she's ready. If you believe it, tell her she can do it. Help her. Tell her she's ready. Let's talk about career development. I mentioned this earlier, but it's so important. Mentorship and sponsorship. The difference, obviously, is a mentor is a coach. A sponsor is someone who's an advocate. Often, one can move into the other and transition into the other. Where you mentor someone, you know their skills, you believe in them, and then you can advocate for them in a room. Try always on feedback, and I mentioned this earlier. Look at the last point here. This particularly is the situation in some stores where if an individual is in leadership, let's just say a store director, the store director will know of an opening and he'll walk over and say, Todd, there's an opening for a position. You're my guy. Well, maybe Todd's the best for the position. Maybe he is. Knowing him, that probably will be the case. But that's not always the case. And there might be some women or some people of color who would be interested in the room, but they had not a clue that it was open until it was filled by someone else. So I say to you who are store directors, eliminate this whole notion of shoulder tap. I know some of you probably already don't do that, but if you do, I ask you not to, with all due respect. It's not the best way. Team dynamics, speaking and interrupting. Let's just talk about this for just a moment. I want this just to really sink in. Again, there are exceptions to everything. But statistically, it's been shown that 2/3 of interruptions come from men. Women are interrupted on average, and again, there are exceptions to everything, 3 times more often than men. So guys, look at me. Got it? Can I move on? Got it? Okay, I'm moving on. Look at this slide. It says, "That's an excellent suggestion, Ms. Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to begin." I've shown this slide to women literally across the U.S. And I will sometimes talk with women and they'll say, "Boy, that's happened more than 3 times." Yeah. I'm going to move on. Thank you guys. Office housework. True story. Last year, I was interviewing to hire a director. And it came down to 2 people. One of the candidates, that was one of the finalists, happened to be a guy. So picture this. We're in a small conference room. There are 3 people there. There's the candidate, so I'll be the candidate. I'm sitting there, and seated there is a person from HR. The person from HR happened to be a woman. We're about, 10 minutes or so into the interview, and the candidate turns to the woman. I'm going to use you there. Turns to the woman and says, "I'm kind of thirsty. Would you get me some water?" I didn't say anything right away. But in my mind I said, "What? Are you kidding me? Did that just happen?" "Yes, it just did happen." "What?" And so she said, "Sure, I'll get you some water." I said, "Oh, no, I'll get the water." She said, "Okay." I said, "Oh, no, I'll get the water." And I'm thinking, you guys can just stay and talk for a couple minutes. True story. How many of you want, Todd mentioned my passion for running. How many of you think I ran to get the guy his water? How many of you think that guy got the job? Now, there are other issues like, I don't know, judgment that kind of impacted my decision not to hire this guy. Subtler things than this happen, but it happens all the time. Someone's having a birthday, who do you ask to get the cake? Or to buy the cards? Or you're meeting to take the minutes? Got it? Team dynamics. I need to wrap up, so here are a couple, actually 6 things you can do. Okay, 6 things. Number 1, recognize that if you can fog a mirror, there's probably some bias at work. For and against. Again, it's 2 direction. Probably some bias at work. Second, I would say to you, identify what that bias is for you. For some of you, that's going to be more than one. That's life. Get it. But be honest with yourself. What's going on? And that's the 3rd point. Dissect your bias or your biases. Ask, where did that come from? What's driving this? Why do I feel this way? What's going on here? 4th thing I would say is, if you have more than one bias, and you may, decide which one you're going to work on. It's really hard to work on 5 things at the same time, or 3 things, or 2 things even. Just pick one. Which one am I going to work with? Next one, point 5. Look to interact with someone from that group. Don't go with a clipboard and say, "Hey, I'm trying to be a better person." No, but in an honest and genuine way, just say, "Tell me your story." Try to walk in your shoes. You might find, at the end of the day, a close friend. Last, keep at it. As I mentioned, we are all on the spectrum of being recovering people. We only move towards being a more inclusive individual when we keep at it and we persist. I want to ask you a question. How many of you are serious about our company, a company I love, about our company being the favorite local supermarket? If you're serious about that, and you really mean it, would you stand with me? If you want this to be the favorite local supermarket, and you believe it, and you're committed to that, that's amazing. That's outstanding. Then there's several things I want you to keep in mind and to do. First, keep in mind that companies that embrace diversity and inclusion outperform statistically those that do not. Keep that in mind. You're all leaders here. And by definition, leaders lead. So I'm going to ask you to lead in this, to be a champion for this, to be an advocate for this. When you hear, or if you hear, statements or comments that you know are just not appropriate, I'm going to ask you and implore you to appropriately let folks know we don't play that here. Lastly, I'll say to you, there's an old book that has a phenomenal saying, and it goes like this. Don't just hear the word, do it. My request to each of you is that you don't just hear what I have to say, but that you do what we've talked about today. That's my hope for you, because in the end, I firmly believe that'll help us be what we want to be, the favorite local supermarket. Thank you so much for your time and for talking.